Welcome to the Leadmore podcast. I'm your host, John T. Meyer. The Leadmore podcast is the show where we sit down with leaders of today to help inspire the leaders of tomorrow. Because I really deeply believe that the world needs more leaders, and we want to learn from the best ones out there. And also, leadership doesn't always look the same. It comes in all shapes and sizes, at all levels of the org chart, or with all sorts of titles, or without titles, right? Parents, friends, CEOs, nonprofits. We have lots of amazing leaders out there, and it's our job on this show to introduce them and bring them to you. So here on episode 41, it's the second time we've done a duo episode. We did it last summer, but this time we have a husband and wife duo. So in this episode, I sat down with Chris Maxwell and Molly Weisgram of Pierre, South Dakota. And this is a heavy episode. This is some intense stuff. Molly and Chris have a fascinating story, a story about heartache, a story about building family, a story about supporting your loved one. And I don't want to give too much away. So basically, Chris had a very intense disease that he contracted that basically left him completely paralyzed. Their story is about the journey of what that took to get him back to today, which if you saw him, if you know Chris Maxwell and you saw him today, you would hardly even know, you probably wouldn't even know that he had this, but it wasn't without struggle. And so in this episode, we hear both Chris's story from his perspective, but also a perspective that isn't often told, which is from the caregiver's perspective. And so Molly talking about how she went through that as a wife, as a mother with their 4 kids, with watching her best friend go through this. She's set to release her first book about this same topic titled The Other Side of Us. That's coming out here in April. And so we talk about that as well. It's just a lot to unpack. It's a very full episode. So let's just jump in here. All right, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Leadmore podcast. I'm here with the husband and wife duo, Chris Maxwell and Molly Weisgram. How are you guys doing today?
Great.
Doing great, John.
So you're both in Pierre or Fort Pierre, somewhere at work today, right? Both of you guys?
Yep.
Yes, and. Yes.
Yes, and. Okay.
Yes, and yes. Pierre.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into your guys' story. So I know that you guys met in college, right?
Yes, we did. Chris's sister actually introduced us. So I got a duo. I got a best friend and a husband/best friend out of the deal.
So were you already friends with his sister then?
Yeah, we actually, his sister Suzanne and I are friends, and it was a couple years later that Chris and I started dating. So
we still disagree over the story of when or time of how we met, but probably just one of many throughout the years.
Well, when your sister introduces, then I would think that that's a strong endorsement, right? You wouldn't want to lose a friend if something didn't work out. So
yeah, this is true.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it all worked out great. And I was
luckily,
pretty lucky, really lucky to have the introduction. Obviously,
and you guys, Molly, you're from the Fort Pierre area, right?
Right. Yep. I grew up in Pierre.
Okay, Pierre. Okay, and when did you guys move back to that area?
We moved back
in 2011.
Yeah, so 10 years ago, actually. So
about the time when you started your family then, right? Because your oldest is 10?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we had started, he was not quite 1 year old when we moved back. He'll be 11 in the middle of March.
Cool. Well, having 2 little girls, I can vouch for the value of having, help and having grandparents nearby. Yeah, so we have one an hour away. So, but having those emergency drop-offs, I'm sure, are super helpful when needed.
Yes, absolutely. Or when there's trauma in your family and you suddenly need some extra hands. Very helpful.
That's where I wanted to go next. So you just teed me up.
Yeah.
You just teed me up perfectly for what is a pretty fascinating story that we want to hear and share today for our audience here on the Leadmore podcast. So I'm going to start maybe, Chris, do you want to explain what happened in your guys' life a couple of years ago that was certainly unexpected?
Yeah. So just over 2 years ago, actually, the anniversary was Valentine's Day of 2019, and the week or so leading up to that date, uh, uh, life otherwise being normal, and us raising 4 kids, in our routine of life, working, just busy, active, and me still being able to be very active. In fact, playing City League basketball, uh, started to have some strange sensations in my extremities, feet, fingers, almost some feelings like almost like if you'd have the feelings of carpal tunnel and some of those things in your hands, some strange just sensations in the feet and legs, and ultimately those getting to the point of me having a very strange experience, just getting ready for a strategic planning session, one of many that I've done along the way, but hauling my stuff into the building as we were getting ready to have the conversations, the wind happened to kind of hit my leg on a cold February afternoon, and it felt like water was splashed onto my leg, like really cold, icy water onto my leg. And it just that just kind of stopped me in my tracks. Didn't stop me enough from doing my strategic planning session that day. So we got all the way through that during the day, and I called the doctor, and he said, come in, all of those symptoms that you're explaining would maybe seem to feel like they connect or make sense, and you could kind of dismiss them, but they don't all seem to connect to me. And so he got me in the next morning. Thankfully, it was one of our good friends and somebody who could sneak us in. And
classic South Dakota there, yeah.
Classic South Dakota, it absolutely was. And thankfully he was the one we went to, because he put his investigator hat on, as just like in many other cases with Guillain-Barré syndrome, it could be easy to dismiss it as you start getting diagnosed. And so I went in to see him. He said this strange weakness in my shoulder didn't seem to make sense. So he started doing a bunch of tests. And as we kept doing them, and as we went through that day, which had been the day before Valentine's Day, I continued to get weaker and weaker. In fact, by the end of that day, as we were going in, after I had been to the ER for a spinal tap, after we'd been home to try to go see the kids quick, and I thought I was going to go home, and the ER had sent me home, I felt like I had aged 40 years, and Molly,
so almost noticeably by the hour.
Noticeably,
wow.
Yeah. And actually, as we went home to pick up the kids, I told Molly that I got to go back. I was just starting to not feel confident and comfortable, and starting to get out of my head, like many of us who don't like to go to the doctor or prefer to not to go to the doctor. Kind of gave into the this isn't all just getting better. I'm not just going to sleep this off. And so went back to the hospital, checked in, and then by the next morning was diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a rare autoimmune disease that affects somewhere in the 100 to 200,000 people a year in the United States. It's basically your immune system is triggered to attack your peripheral nervous system. So it starts to eat away at the protective covering. If you think of your nerves as the wiring of your body, your nerves have a protective plastic covering on the outside, and it starts to eat away at that, and works from the outside in, toes and fingers in, and you hope it doesn't progress to the core of your body, basically, and start to shut down those pieces.
And is this genetic, or does it enter your body, or just random?
It is pretty much random. They're trying their best to connect the dots of what causes it, and sometimes they do think it's caused by some sort of virus, something kicking your body to triggering it to respond in the way that it does. But they are, I think, guessing many times and trying to connect and correlate things, and it's a challenge, I know, for the physicians.
Well, not maybe this statement not to make a judgment on the peer healthcare system, but I'm almost shocked that they found that solution so quickly. Like for something that is so rare, it seems like something you'd have to work through a lot of tests before you find this.
There aren't
answer.
A lot of other cases. I mean, I think it's 100,000 in the world per year.
Yeah.
And most other patients definitely don't have the experience that we did with a physician, number one, championing us the way he did. And having a physical medicine rehab specialist who had been in rehab facilities and better understood this very rare disease. So his feelers were up, but you're right. It's kudos to the peer system, because that was a pretty incredible, they figured it out faster than most I think in the world probably would have.
Getting that champion, having somebody there on your side doing that investigation for you, it's like many other things that people deal with when you do get bounced around from generalist specialists and trying to solve a problem. If you don't have a continuity of assessment and care and trying to analyze the problem, you can get lost in the shuffle, and that's what happens to a lot of people. And a lot of people end up with the ambulance having to, paramedics having to come and carry them out of their house because, they can't walk anymore, that kind of thing.
But to continue the story, I think I've also read, I remember last time we spoke, that maybe a lot of people also maybe don't have such a severe as an experience as you did. So to keep your story going, there was still a lot more. It wasn't like, hey, we know what this is. Here's some medicine, send you home. Yeah. Very different.
So they have there's a protocol that they follow. There's a treatment that they do. They do plasmapheresis as well as IVIG treatment. Both of those kind of trying to slow down the progression. And I went through both of those. In fact, they don't do those in tandem very much anymore. They usually just choose one. And I was care flighted, flown from Pierre to Sioux Falls. Gotten there as soon as I possibly could. And it's like a lot of things. It's like different people's cancers. You roll the dice and you get what you get, and your body responds in the ways that it responds. And the treatments sometimes only work as well as they can. And for us, we think, we were hopefully blessed with the treatment slowing it down and getting us in the right places to get care over the following days. But I just had as severe of onset as anyone, at least anyone, the healthcare professionals we talked to, anyone there that had seen it. And my case of Guillain-Barré syndrome quickly progressed to me losing the mobility in my extremities, and then ultimately within a few days had progressed to my diaphragm stopping to work, and ultimately lung collapsing, pneumonia in the other lung, coding, and having to be rushed to the ICU and be intubated and put on a ventilator. Leaving my wife in the room upstairs, wondering what's next and where do we go from here. Yeah. And that's frankly just the beginning of the story, which is crazy.
Yeah. So the start of your story made me think that night you didn't get home to see your kids. Yeah. When was the next time you ended up talking to your children, since you didn't get to that night?
We saw them briefly and left that night. And frankly, Molly, you could probably speak this better than me, really felt like we left in a rush that evening even. And I know they told us later, in some ways kind of left them hanging and wondering. And how did the communication go from there, Molly? I mean, I'll kind of turn that over to you. You're I started to lose the ability to speak. And so I don't even remember how long it took till I saw them next.
Yeah. Well, the technical answer is that before we were flown out from Pierre to Sioux Falls, because we stayed overnight observation in Pierre, the next day they diagnosed Chris's case and then flew him over to Sioux Falls. But my parents brought the kids over to Pierre to say goodbye. And Chris was, as he usually is, very positive, super pumped about the flight that he gets to go on an airplane. and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
And, but probably the question you were asking is the next time they saw him was really, I think, 2.5 weeks later in Sioux Falls, intubated in the ICU, and probably 40 pounds lighter. I don't know. It was rather, I tried to kind of, I guess, save them from having to see Chris that way. But the progression of his disease and the process was going to be so much longer than I would have anticipated, that it was time. They had to see it.
Yeah. We really had a lot of discussion, at least as much as we could, with my ability to communicate on what was the right time to have them come see me. I think, you remain hopeful, and you actually get a really good diagnosis when you get Guillain-Barré syndrome, and that they do give you hope, and that 90 to 95% of people, get back from it. And so there's a really positive potential outcome. Now, thankfully, they didn't know, and I didn't know how bad it was going to get for me, and they didn't take that hope away from me along the way. But we were, I think, wrestling with, and I know Molly even more than me, because she was carrying the weight of all of our family and all of the things that I was just frankly focused on myself, because that's all you can be in the moment. Yep. But we talked a lot about, when do you bring your kids into that conversation? How do you best bring them into it? Just a really scary place to be in, and so hard to know what the right decision is.
Well, and I don't want to, gloss over details, but I know we could unpack the week by week for the whole episode. But
you have to watch me, yeah, because I could.
I just know my experience was, you're a type of person I kind of run into in Sioux Falls, even though you live 3.5 hours away. Like, just randomly every once in a while, I'll see you at Queen City Bakery or something, and yep. I vividly remember my wife and I were at a show at the Pavilion, and it was intermission, and I saw our mutual friend, Brian Graham, and he was like, tomorrow I got to get to Pierre. There's this fundraiser kind of event for Chris and his family. And I was like, wait, what? But for what? And he told me the story, and I think I maybe missed a Facebook post, I'm not on Facebook as much. And what he described to me that day is like, he's got this rare disease. He can only move his eyes. He's spelling out words with his eyes. And we can talk about that. But like, I just gone from 0 to 100 in terms of what I had heard. And that was, I think, May or something like that when we had talked. So we started at Valentine's Day, and, I heard about it months later. And so this thing didn't get better anytime soon. I mean, talk to us about where your journey went from there.
Yeah. And so I ended up becoming paralyzed to the point of not being able to blink my eyes, on fully on a ventilator, ultimately getting to a point where they transferred me out of the ICU into some acute care, neuroacute care, and then ultimately moving me to a long-term recovery hospital, and we were in the Barré hospital system here in South Dakota, to the Madonna Rehabilitation Hospital in Lincoln. And in that place is where they start setting you up to work on your recovery. And at that point I was, not moving anything, not even blinking my eyes. I was fully on a ventilator, had lost 60 pounds that time in the hospital, literally the muscle atrophy, and that kind of on steroids, because you can't move anything for me with the Guillain-Barré syndrome, or I couldn't, and really moving to a point of mentally, we look back on it, and there probably was a few weeks to a month where I was really in and out of reality, to be honest. It's just such a strange, bizarre place to be in. And then you start climbing out of that hole and doing the best you can. And we started on that journey in Lincoln, and was able to over a couple. Go ahead, Molly.
Clarification.
I was just going to say that, Guillain-Barré is really, there's 3 phases of the disease. it's a descent. We call it our descent into hell, where your body is shutting down. And then there's a plateau where you are just in stasis. You're waiting for your nerves and muscle activation to start again, and then your recovery. Chris was on a ventilator. He had a tracheostomy after 2 weeks. He was on a ventilator for a total of 15 weeks. We had to tape his eyes shut because, surprisingly, when you have no muscle activation even in your eyelids, rather than staying shut, they're wide open. So it's terrifying to look at. I'm sure he looked terrified. It was a scary thing. So we had to tape his eyes shut because you have to preserve the body as best you can, because the prognosis is relatively good. Someone with Guillain-Barré may not recover fully. Chris still can't really feel his feet, for instance, or his experience, sorry to talk for you, Chris, but his experience every day is, if I had what he had, I'd go crazy. I wouldn't be able to think. I think the severity of his case and the length that he has experienced that, first of all, one, I know you're grateful, Chris, to have what you have. And two, it's just life. You just kind of have to deal with it. And you're lucky you get
because to your point about the recovery, I know that some people go back to as if they never had it, right? In terms of you would never know. And that's probably even you when someone sees you.
They wouldn't at this point, John. I mean, you really wouldn't unless we started talking about it. And or if there's little differences, but you likely wouldn't recognize it. And frankly, I am, with how bad it got, exceedingly blessed to be in this place that I am.
There are
Chris,
people
what's your level of recollection or memory during those dark kind of 15 weeks, the dip there?
Yeah.
Do you remember this or?
So I remember a lot of it, but we found out later that there just was, like I said, a few weeks to a month that really were because everything gets stripped away. It just was a completely blurred, reality blurred existence, and I had definitely very lucid times. I remember. Sure. I remember a lot of conversations. I felt like I was with it a lot more than I probably was. I also knew that I was in a reality bent state very much of the time as well. And as we look back, I mean, I had friends come to visit me, and I was mentally feeling like we were in a totally different place than we were, and actually having real conversations with people. And so it was crazy. I thought many of my dreams were reality. And I could tell you many stories about strange encounters with my family afterwards, talking about, believing that our daughter wasn't going to walk the same way again. And, actually believing I was arrested by the feds in the middle of my Guillain-Barré recovery, to strange phantom feelings, and the list can go on. It really was a strange, and between the painkillers and the lack of movement and your body just being stripped down to the point it was definitely an ego stripped, reality stripped state.
Yeah. And so I think this is a good segue from, so people might be like, well, okay, what does this have to do with leadership? Right. And I think it's good to get the whole story kind of out there and talk about the severity and the magnitude and the impact, because you guys are both very involved in your community, leaders in your professional life. I certainly believe parents are leaders, for kids. So let's shift to what does an experience like this do to you as a person, as a couple, as a family, as a professional? And Molly, I'll let you start there. Talk about your experience. How did you lead your family through this? I think you call it, I guess first the trauma, but then of course the post-traumatic growth. So let's start there.
Yeah. Well, we had an 8-month-old was our youngest at the time. And Ben, our oldest, I think was 8. Yeah. So I had very young children, and luckily had, as we talked about at the beginning, family close by. And I'm so thankful for that, because I don't know. So it takes a village, but
sure.
We get used to, and even more so, I think people can relate to this post having this COVID experience, but we get really used to thinking life's more certain than it is. And when life in fact has a lot of uncertainty, this was a very, very uncertain situation where, while the prognosis is good, there are a lot of people who do end up in nursing homes for a long time. I mean, Chris is a healthy 42-year-old, and we had a baby. That was 4 babies, but a literal baby.
Yeah.
So, first of all, you don't have all the information, right? So, it's in life, we often don't when we're trying to lead through things, but you're trying to collect I tried to collect as much information as I could in order to make good decisions, because there are decisions as a patient, caregiver, advocate for the patient. You have choice. I mean, certainly you are not the medical professional and you're going to use their opinions, but you have to navigate the system when you're going to be in the system. Chris didn't come home until 9 months later. So we had to think about how, and I didn't know that at the time, but we had to use each step and do it with as much emotion as there was. Do it with your head. You have to make decisions with good information. So it certainly changed every week. But once we understood his case was as severe as it was, that's where I started looking. What I talked about is, it's like I was unfolding this map and I said, I know where our destination is. We are going home. I don't know how we're going to get there yet. We might go the short way and we might be going the long way. And I want to think, I'm going to do a little bit of route planning if it's going to be the long way. So luckily our healthcare system is rife with advocates, from social workers to folks who can advise you in these situations. It felt ridiculous to send him 7 hours away to another state when we had such a young family. And yet when I stepped back and looked at the larger picture, it was the best thing we could do to invest in best possible outcomes. So I had to think about for me, it was hard because I wasn't with my kids for the first couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first 6 weeks, we slept on the floor of the hospital because Chris's mother and I and family, because it was such a crisis. It was literally moment by moment. Things were, it's a very bizarre disease and there are a lot of bizarre things happening. So I had to step back and say, okay, how am I going to be with my kids? Am I going to be with my husband? My kids really need me. Chris really, really needs me. The best way I can be a mom right now is to take care of my kid's dad.
Sure.
And then there was a point where I had to say, okay, the best way for me to be a wife right now is to take care of our kids. So I think the thing from a leadership perspective that I'll share, and this has become where you talk about post-traumatic growth, is that, in the midst of crisis like this, health crisis, you're getting texts constantly. It's such an unexpected thing. Nothing about this makes sense. And everyone's like, how's Chris doing? What's the update? What's going on? I heard something's happening.
Yeah.
And I talk about it as like free falling. It's very hard to describe what's happening when you're literally free falling. It's so blurry. And if you spent the energy to talk about it and describe it, there's another view as soon as you hit send. So from a leadership perspective, I'm going to talk about communication a little bit, because I felt like it's such a personal thing. It was so confusing. I didn't know what to say, but I was really urged to communicate somehow. It was too difficult to do individual texts. There were so many things happening. And I got the recommendation to use Caring Bridge. And I always had kind of looked at that site as something that was kind of setting him up for like, I don't know, pre his death. I was just very like, oh my gosh, 2 days later and we're on a carrying bridge. I just can't do it.
Yeah. That makes sense.
And then I found that I had to, I had to communicate somehow. But then I found that creating that link of communication, especially in a way that felt true for me, because I didn't want to be a victim in this case. I didn't want Chris to be the poor Chris or me to be the poor. I wanted to create a picture frame for this horrible experience that would set us up for the best possible like growth through this experience. So I felt that I got to set the narrative by writing Caring Bridge, by communicating in a way that allowed me to think about, okay, what's actually going on here? Let's step back and see perhaps the beautiful things, the things you're grateful for. Let's look at the trajectory of this disease literally by only writing like 2 weeks at a time and seeing what had really happened, because it's so emotionally trying.
Yeah.
That I felt like that setting of the narrative was just critical for me. I just did not want to be a victim in this case. I just didn't want Chris to be a victim. So it's hard when he has a small business he's trying to maintain, and I'm trying to protect our family, his business. I didn't want him. I wanted to keep it as strong as possible. I don't know if that makes sense.
And people checking in is, certainly because they care, but also like, what can they really do at that point?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I heard a couple things from you from a leadership standpoint in terms of like gathering all information from all the resources, but also understanding that you're always making a choice with the information you have in that moment, knowing that you have the right to change your mind, or that it probably will change even hours or minutes later with more information. And being okay with that, making that decision and communicating it and moving on.
Yep. And projecting out how you might be going, those possible routes really helped me figure out how to ask questions. Because you're around people who, while they don't have all the answers, they have a lot of answers. And it's really important for you to be able to ask good questions. And what my laying out that map of how are we going to get home, I don't know exactly, but if it is the long way, I want to know what questions I need to be asking in the meantime to set us up for the best success. So it was definitely I don't know if it's fair to say this, but I will say it, a war between my head and my heart. There was a lot of emotions, and you kind of just tailspin and crash. And so I kind of had to put my heart away a little bit and just use my head.
And I'll tell you, Molly and I've talked a lot about how she was made to be the caregiver and I was made to be the patient. We from a leadership perspective, like we were both able to lead from those two different places. She, in that place of having to do the worst case scenario forecasting and manage to what the potential risks are, just killed it, just was on it, managing everyone, thinking about those dynamics, able to, her personality wise, as compared to me, take and grasp those things and put things into reality, put things into motion, and really, really organize everything that was going on in her space. And I, on the other side of it, couldn't be in that mindset. And I had to think a completely different way in many ways, and not be managing to the downside. In fact, dreaming towards the upside and holding on to that hope and that big vision of things. And Molly, just like I know she talks about in her book, and her friend said to her along the way, you're the captain of the ship. And she put that uniform on and just absolutely steered it in all the right directions, which made it possible for me to recover in the ways that I was able to.
So I'm curious, to you guys, you can both answer this. Have you gone back and read those Caring Bridge posts?
Absolutely. Yeah, go ahead, Molly.
Yeah.
And maybe what your experience is, yeah.
they're a really important part actually of the documenting of what happened, because you also are still in free fall and it is still blurry. And so every once in a while being able to be like, what was that? I can't even, it's been lifetimes. But that probably leads to a project that I've been working on, that when Chris did get home, I wasn't done writing. I mean, I spent time on these caring bridges. This was an important part of my therapy, actually,
Sure.
my own processing of this. And so I worked a writing project once Chris got home with an intention of really saying, okay, look at this. We have a second chance. And the same people are here at the end than at the beginning. This is rather phenomenal. What are we going to do with it? Because do we just want to go back to normal? And normal is wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but we have choices. We can make choices. We have a different perspective now. So my writing project was, what do you do with the second chance? But instead, it really ended up being a thorough processing of what had happened. It was part of the healing. So in a book that will be putting out here in about a month, the caring bridges are all incorporated. And I would say they're a little bit more of the front facing, and how I communicated our predicament to the kind of people who cared about us, public at large, I'll say. And then the other part of the book is very much more of the behind the curtain, what was going on and how you deal with it.
That's compelling. Yeah. And you set me up perfect for my next question, which I want you both to answer as well. So we'll go to Chris first, but maybe it's unfair to say this, but like, when folks often have like a near death experience, and I don't know if you ever felt like that's, if that's the right label to use, but you often see people make very big life changes after that, right? So somebody has a heart attack and they learn their correct cholesterol is really high. So they completely change their diet. They start to run, and all of a sudden they qualify for the Boston Marathon or whatever, right? These huge life changes. And typically life doesn't happen that way. It's small, little 1% changes, but often it takes a big triggering event to make wholesale changes. So, I knew you before this happened, and now I know you more, but like how have you changed your life since this? Because I know this gets into some of the stuff you guys are working on now, but I want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, first of all, when I've talked about this experience, the experience that I had, I've talked many times about how when something like this happens to you, you show up with what you got. You've got your modeling, you've got your belief system, you've got your relationships, you've got all those things that you've accumulated over time. And when that trauma happens, you've got what you got, and you need to tap into that however best you can. And I was exceedingly blessed to have wonderful modeling relationships, wife, family, support system, community, all those things, which for me, the experience really forged in fire some things that really mattered to me. And gave me that. In fact, I've talked many times, I work with startup organizations, have been a part of them, successes, failures, everywhere in between, and have been building kind of this business belief system along the way. And I actually was kind of forced to put those in practice for myself with my own recovery. And in doing that, in many ways it worked. It showed up for me in my most challenging time, and in that experience of having to go back to those things that mattered most to me. In some ways, things are moving on as they did before. I just had that opportunity to go out and test it in a big way. And in other ways, as I know Molly said many times as well, there will always be a before and an after. And through going through this experience and having those things forged in fire, I've said many times to people, my eyes are just lifted up to a higher horizon. My belief in what is possible and what we can do together, and hopes and expectations of life are higher. you come back a little bit more nicked up, though. You've got some things that you're wrestling with in a bigger way than you maybe had before. But we said coming out of it that we want to fall forward. We want to fall upward. We want to spiral upward towards what's next in front of our lives. And we had people tell us, things will just go back to normal. It'll all be the same again. You'll be stressing and worrying about the same things again before you know it. And to be honest, I've had some of that sneak back in. All of a sudden you realize I'm worrying about this thing in a way that I used to, and that doesn't serve me. And being able to kind of go back to my experience of trauma to help me break out of that getting into that place mentally. But I think our horizons are bigger, better, stronger. The possibilities in our life are just even greater because of the experience we had. But ultimately it comes back to the choices we make now. So just because that happened to us doesn't mean we're going to make different choices.
Yeah. So if you were to, I think you mentioned it briefly, Molly, like the idea of, in a way, I guess if someone's listening to this, COVID has given us this experience where everybody's life was changed, or more appropriate, we learned how little we are in control. Now, I wouldn't want to compare, staying at home and watching Netflix and getting my food dropped off at the front door to what you guys went through. But there's an opportunity, the great line of don't waste a good crisis, right? So Molly, what would you say? Because I think what's interesting about your story is the side of the story we don't always hear, right? We usually hear from the person who went through the trauma, about how they had this near-death experience. But obviously there's so many other people involved in this, which you were very involved. So what do you say now? How has your life changed, and how have you made different choices?
What I always think about, what you do today is what shows up tomorrow. And we were really, really lucky before Chris was sick. Years before, we actually both really subscribed to a philosophy about how your thoughts are things, and they really matter, and they're seeds that grow. And so luckily we had this mental training before this happened to Chris, and literally, and I can say maybe partially it's because it was a relatively good prognosis, but when Chris was diagnosed, the doctor left the room and said, and I looked at him and I said, Chris, this is going to be the best thing that ever happened to us. I didn't know he was going to be ventilated for 15 weeks and gone from home, and I wouldn't see my babies for whatever, but I will say that perspective and framing is wildly important. And, oddly enough, while Chris was completely devastated, it was horrible. It was sickeningly horrible. I feel like I have found a part of myself that it was there, but I didn't know it at the time. I recognize it now. And I've always wanted to write a book. Well, how weird. I didn't really have this as my subject topic that I was striving to write, but I wrote a book. I have found expression through words and sharing that I think is really a vulnerable side of me, but a strong side of me. Never waste a good crisis. And I feel like it was a refining of my person by going through this. And I feel like right now I'm coming out more me than before.
So I'm just fascinated, like all the lessons, like there's so much we can learn from this story. Let's move to the phase of how has it changed the way you run your family and changed the way you interact with your kids or your relation, like completely other end of the spectrum. But, the times when I'm on my phone and my daughter's like, hey, pay attention to me. And I'm like, oh, I just got to send this email quick, right? Like these moments that we think these things that are so important. And then all of course we ever hear as a parent is how fast they grow up. So Molly, you can go first. How has it changed the way you think about your family?
While Chris was gone, it obviously was difficult. And we did family counseling every week. So I got my kids in there and participated with them. And so I'm saying it, I'm pitching with that because that experience alone, one, them going through a hardship, but then working through it and providing like a space for them to work out the things they were thinking and feeling, allowed me a perspective on them. I know them in a different way than I did before. I know how they deal with stress in a way that I hadn't. I saw some really beautiful glimpses of their very wise souls. So one, I think I have a better appreciation for who they are, and I want to honor that. Two, I'll say the spitting us back out on this end of our life there's a whole nother healing period that you go through. The kids go through, Chris goes through, I go through. We all had different perspectives of the exact same situation. And in some ways we're still kind of bringing it back together and weaving it together. Should I be writing a book, for instance, as a mom, you probably go, oh, I can't do those kinds of things right now because I need to focus on my family. And I will say that, sure, while it took me away a lot, I think it's added to our life in a way that I'm proud that they can watch me do that. I'm proud that they can, as soon as I got my galley proof, our oldest grabbed it and went upstairs and read. And I see them doing their own projects right now in a way that something's possible that wasn't before to them. But I think it's also that there's conflict in life and in family, and it takes work to, happily ever after is a process, and it's a choice every single day. So I don't think we do it perfectly, but I think we're wise enough to know that it is something you choose and engage in to have a healthy family and honor each person who comes at it, even if they're only 5.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, and John, I think we're working on it. I mean, we're, like any couple, you continue to be working on it. And we've talked many times of, trauma just brings things to an acute point, and your parenting gets brought to an acute point. Your relationship gets brought to this acute point. And frankly, you're forced to address and wrestle with things that everyone's wrestling with, and you're going to continue to wrestle with. And so, it doesn't just magically strip away the relationship dynamics that exist. In fact, it gives you an enhanced opportunity to work on them, if you want to put a positive spin on that approach to it. But as Molly said earlier, before all of this trauma happened, we were blessed to have gone through a spiritual process together and a mindset setting process together that really got us in that approach of thinking about everything being for us, thinking about how our thoughts matter and how we approach the world. What is the mindset that we're in, and ultimately trying to, for us, embrace a growth mindset at all times and embrace the challenges and things that came into our lives. We didn't know this was the kind of challenge that was going to happen. But then that all, you flip it to me coming home, just brought all that to an acute point, and we're unpacking a lot, and we continue to unpack a lot. We will be the best parents and have the best family we possibly can because of this trauma. Would we have asked for it? No. Would many people who have those kind of things that come into their life, would they have asked for it to happen? No. But we get to choose how we take it. Do we take it for us, or do we take it for being for us, or we take it for being against us? And we're still working on it every day, but we're just trying to put that gratitude hat on at all times and be thankful for what it got to teach us.
Yeah, I love that. So growth mindset, operate from a space of abundance versus scarcity. Yeah, it sounds like maybe no more sugarcoating. You say exactly what you feel. Very honest conversations, probably.
Yeah. You get into counseling. You embrace that, even more of those conversations and opening those things up. And we were working on it before, John, and huge fans of Parenting with Love and Logic, trying to incorporate that into how we communicate with our kids. And we really like to sit down and talk and hash it out. But you get in your old grooves, you get in your ways of how you've always done it. And, not the way we would have chosen it, but it certainly cut open some knots and created some opportunities for growth for us.
That's great. Well, I want to, the next question, I think will kind of move us toward the stuff that you're working on, Molly, but what are I have to imagine that you've been connected to people that you never imagined because of this story, or people have reached out, or maybe somebody, I think what I've always heard about Carrying Bridge, you just don't know the people that will end up stumbling upon this or the link that will get shared. So Molly, talk to me about, pull an example of someone who's reached out to you saying they've been inspired by this, or that like they went through something similar, or I'm guessing that led to the project that you're now doing. Maybe not, but any examples of something where you just couldn't imagine that your story here in Pierre got, somewhere else?
Oh man, I don't have one right at the tip of my tongue. Chris, are you thinking of something that we've?
Well, all I'll say is, and it kind of leads to the rest of the conversation, and maybe I'm giving away a little bit of something, but endorsement that Molly got for her book through a good friend of mine, a good friend of ours. Molly, would you have dreamed of Deepak Chopra being part of an endorsement for your book when you were thinking about writing a book before I got sick?
I might have dreamed of it. Yeah, it was pretty.
So it's though people stepping up, and we didn't even know that was in the works when Molly was working on endorsements for her book, and just how people wanting to see you successful and lift you up. And I think that was the biggest thing for me, just how community rose up, and how you didn't even know that was out there, prayers that were being prayed for you, love that was out there in abundance, as you said, that abundance mindset thing, just how the universe can show up for you. It just was overwhelming, the love.
Yeah, I hope that people take that from this episode, that idea that, I've had to learn that through, I have a coach who's helped me realize that the power of your mind what you say connects to your brain, right? And then there's like this circle there that, our words are powerful, and what we say, can really influence what we believe is possible. And so I know it's changed your business, Chris. I want to hear about then, Molly, how did this project, maybe you said you always wanted to write a book, but you didn't have a subject. It fell in your lap. So tell us about what you were working on.
Yeah. So like I'm launching my first book right at the beginning of April. And it's called The Other Side of Us, a memoir of trauma, truth, and transformation. And, it was truly a catharsis for me. The project I have reached my goal by doing it. I have processed my feelings, the experience, and I cataloged it for our kids, because someday when they're older, I want them to, one, have the chance to revisit it from an adult's perspective. But I want them to take it as an opportunity to learn that same kind of concept that, thoughts are things, and the way you frame something is so important, and very well could change the course of the whole process. So while you don't have a lot of control, sometimes you have a lot of choice, and I want them to know that that's something that's so important. So in a lot of ways I have accomplished it, but you write a book, and it's a pretty vulnerable book. It's pretty intimate. And I verbatim put all of my ICU journal. I was scratching out stuff all the time just because I was exploding inside. Sure. So it's pretty intimate, but you write it, and it's kind of an opportunity, one, to grow yourself a little bit, to get it out there, because it's very uncomfortable to become, I'm a pretty private person. So to put yourself out there publicly is an opportunity to grow. But, if it is, I believe that the people who would need that for whatever reason, whatever they need in their life, if that book comes in front of them for whatever reason, I believe the people who need to read it will have an opportunity. And I want to make that opportunity available. So it's definitely been a little bit out of a comfort zone for me, but I think that's so important, and I feel really right about it.
That's great.
John, I think it's such an important, it has been a process for us. It has been such a wonderful catharsis, as Molly said. But as many have said to me, and as we've talked about along the way, is that story of the caregiver, and especially as the people who work in those healthcare facilities who talk about, that person who's walking behind the person in the hospital bed or in the wheelchair, who's the person that's hanging on for dear life with their fingernails on the edge of a cliff trying to hold things together. Like, that story doesn't get told enough. The story of that hero, there's a lot of talk about the hero of the person who survives cancer, or survives the accident, or survives Guillain-Barré syndrome. But the hero that lifts that other person up, that carries the family and carries the community and carries that person. I just think it's a powerful story of the things that Molly carried through that process, and that I'm sure many, many can and will relate to, that have been caregivers in what other way, whatever, whether it's a traumatic event or it's taking care of their parents as they're aging, or there's just so many applicable things that I think people could really connect with the story Molly's telling.
Yeah, and how many people are sitting in the hospital lobby right now going through that same, that same role, that same story.
Yeah.
Well, I think the best projects, serve you first, for your own, like you said, catharsis, but then also a byproduct can be someone else can enjoy that. And then even the third, I always say that reason of even doing this podcast or creating videos or writing blog. I love the idea of creating content that if someday my two little girls want to know what their dad thought about in his 30s, they can go find, and maybe they won't.
And they will. Oh, they will.
The internet doesn't forget. And so, this idea of documenting it as a time frame, like a phrase in your life, that you'll be able to look back, 10, 20, 30 years from now. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So we're not going to do the normal quick fire at the end, but there's one that I want to ask and finish with as we wrap here, because maybe it's changed from this experience or maybe not. I'm curious, but we'll go to Chris first, which is the question I always ask people when we hire at Lemonly. What is your superpower? Sitting here as a survivor of, I don't even want to say it again because I'm always going to say it wrong, but Guillain-Barré syndrome. Chris, what's your superpower or the one thing you do better than anyone else?
Yeah, well, John, I'm glad this is one you asked, because I've been thinking about it since I heard you ask it on your own podcast with Governor Dugard a while back.
Episode 1.
And it's something that we talked about through my recovery, and really what lifted me up and lifted up those around me. In fact, connects to the rest of our conversation is my superpower is positivity. And always looking for the most positive potential outcome, relationship, scenario. I've always laughed and joked with Molly that I try to look at people long enough that they look at me at times to try to get them to engage with me and give me a smile, and so I can give them a smile. And I live for those things, and that served me in such a way. And I'll use one quick example in the hospital. The ability to be positive for me, I just feel like can impact, and it's what's naturally in my DNA, but really can serve you and impact those around you. And in a hospital setting where there's so many people wrestling with so many challenges, to be able to be positive and have hopefully those around you be able to be a little more positive, because that's just where you naturally go to. Just served me at my core, and I hope served others around me, unendingly optimistic, positive. That's me.
Yeah, I'm not surprised that was your answer. And I'll say I think about 95% of the people who listen to this show listen to the podcast. But I do record the video and I just drop it on YouTube in case anybody wants to see what these people look like. And I will say, I don't know if even Molly noticed, but when you were speaking, the way that Chris would look at you and his reaction and his his eye contact and his smiles, I thought was something to note. It was noticeable even through the Zoom call. So I thought that was special. Okay, well, same question.
I'll take that as a compliment, John.
It is. Same question for you, Molly. What's your superpower?
Well, I really think that you do lead with your strengths. And so in stress, I was even surprised, to be honest, how I naturally went to precision. And I think that I'm intuitive, but the precision aspect of the questions, the answers are, you look frozen. Are we stuck?
Sorry. No, I'm not frozen. I was just listening.
Sorry. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm going to start.
You're good.
So I do think that you lead with your strengths. And so in that high stress experience, I found myself gravitating to what I was best at. And it's being really precise. I don't know if it's perfectionistic as much as it is precise. I wanted to know what questions to ask. I wanted to hear the answers. I wanted to lay it all out in front of me and use really good judgment for every next step of the way. And I think it helps that I'm a highly intuitive person, but I would have to go with precision.
Cool. I like that. It's a good word. It's a powerful word. All right. So before we wrap here, how can, if somebody is inspired by this show, if somebody has gone through a similar experience and just needs someone to talk to, or, gets the link passed on, dropped on their inbox, how can they reach out or connect with you? You said the book is coming out early April. Mm-hmm. You can both answer that question. Molly, I know you have a website.
I do. Yep. mollyweisgram.com. And you can find my email address there.
Cool. Chris?
Yeah. And you can, you can find about Maxwell Strategies, maxwellstrat.com. I mean, that really is the when I talked about that, I was a startup, and the story of the belief system we were building from a business perspective and what I relied on in this process, that's got all of that laid out there in there, and kind of tells about who I am and who the business is. So
cool. Well, thank you guys for sharing your story today, both sides of the story, and hearing. It's a powerful one, and I hope that others will enjoy hearing it too. So thanks for your time.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Take care. All right. That is episode 41. Thank you, Chris and Molly, for sharing your story, for being leaders to each other, to your family, to your community. Yeah, it was really enlightening to hear that story, both sides of that story. I'm excited to see and of course read Molly's book when it comes out. And I really enjoyed that conversation. I learned a lot. So I hope you did too. And that is it here. Remember, we drop new episodes every Thursday of the Leadmore podcast. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Check out leadmorepodcast.com to find the latest episode. And if you have somebody that you want to hear on the show, or if you think you want to be on the show, hit me up. Probably Twitter is the easiest spot, @John T. Meyer. Send me a tweet with your recommendation of who should be on the show, and of course, why you think so. That's always helpful. And we'll have new guests again, of course, every Thursday. Take care. Be well.